What happens when a flight attendant disrespects Karoline Leavitt for her beliefs? She never expected what came next. Karoline Leavitt settled into her first-class seat, adjusting the small gold cross necklace that rested just above her collarbone. The flight had barely begun boarding when a flight attendant approached, a stiff smile on her face. At first, Karoline assumed it was the usual greeting, maybe a simple offer of water or a menu. But the woman's eyes weren't on her, they were locked onto the necklace. "Miss, we like to keep the atmosphere welcoming for everyone," the attendant said, her tone light, but unmistakably pointed. "Some passengers might find that a bit inappropriate." Karoline blinked, taken. "Excuse me." The woman's expression didn't change. "We just tried to avoid displays that could make others uncomfortable." For a moment, Karoline thought she had misheard. A display. It was a necklace, nothing more, but the subtle tension in the attendant's voice told her this wasn't a simple suggestion. It was a demand wrapped in the illusion of politeness. A quiet hush had already fallen over the surrounding passenger, a few stealing glances over the tops of their phones. Someone was recording. Karoline sat up straighter. "You're telling me that wearing a cross is making people uncomfortable?" The attendant's smile didn't waver, but the slight shift in her posture gave her away. "I'm just asking for cooperation, Miss Leavitt." The name drop was intentional. She knew exactly who Karoline was. This wasn't about policy, it wasn't about keeping peace on the flight, it was about something else entirely. And that's when Karoline realized this wasn't just an isolated incident, it was a test. Karoline held her ground, refusing to lower her voice, but making sure every word was clear. "Are you saying religious jewelry is against airline policy?" The attendant hesitated. "It's not about policy, it's about—" Karoline cut her off. "It's about what exactly? Because it sounds like you're singling me out for wearing a cross." A few passengers shifted in their seats, eyes darting between Karoline and the attendant. The tension in the cabin thickened. Someone in business class leaned over their seat, whispering to a companion. A soft chime overhead signaled another passenger had rung for assistance. The flight attendant's composure wavered for the first time. "Look, I'm trying to keep this from becoming a problem. If you could just—" A man 2 rows back interrupt. "She's right, you wouldn't say this to someone wearing another religious symbol." The whispering in the cabin turned into murmur. The flight crew had noticed the disruption now, and another attendant approached, this one wearing the stripes of a lead supervisor. She glanced at her colleague, then at Karoline. "What seems to be the issue?" Before Karoline could respond, the first attendant spoke up. "Miss Leavitt's necklace is causing discomfort for some passengers." A pause, then the supervisor's gaze flicked to Karoline's cross and back to the attendant. Her face betrayed nothing but there was a moment of quiet calculation. A camera phone, just barely peeking over a seat back, was capturing everything. The supervisor turned to Karoline. "You're welcome to wear your necklace, Miss Leavitt." The first attendant's face drained of color. She opened her mouth as if to argue, but stopped herself. Karoline caught the slight twitch in her jaw, the way her finger curled against the serving tray she was holding. The murmurs grew louder, a ripple of approval passing through the cabin, then a voice from across the aisle, louder than the rest. "So you really tried to police someone's faith in first class." And just like that, it wasn't just about a necklace anymore, it was about something much bigger. The tension didn't ease. If anything, it tightened, like a rope being pulled from both ends. Karoline kept her posture firm, her eyes locked on the attendant, who had just tried to single her out. The murmurs had turned into full conversations now, passengers shifting in their seats, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others reaching for their phones. The supervisor exhaled, clearly aware that this was spiraling beyond her control. "Miss Leavitt, I apologize for any misunderstanding. You are free to wear your cross." But it was too late. The damage was done. The first attendant knew it too. Her expression flickered between frustration and panic, as if she realized she had miscalculated badly. A man across the aisle leaned forward, raising his phone just enough to make it obvious he was recording. "This is unbelievable. People wear religious symbols all the time, but she gets targeted." Karoline didn't need to respond. The passengers were doing it for her first class. "Doesn't mean first class treatment." Someone muttered. Another voice chimed in, sharper this time. If she weren't conservative, would this even be happening? The flight crew was trapped in a situation they couldn't defuse. The first attendant had no choice but to step back, her lips pressed into a thin, rigid line. The supervisor, sensing the shift in power, turned to Karoline with a carefully measured nod. "Let's get you a drink, Miss Leavitt." On the house, the attempt at smoothing things over only highlighted how much they had fumbled. Karoline didn't need their free drink, she had already won, but as she settled back into her seat, she could feel the eyes on her, not just from the passengers, but from the cameras, from the unseen audience that would soon be watching this unfold. And somewhere in that moment, the flight attendant must have realized the inevitable. By the time this plane landed, this story wouldn't just be a heated argument at 30,000 feet. it would be a headline. As the flight continued, the atmosphere in first class remained thick with tension. Passengers exchanged glances, whispers floating through the cabin like sparks before a fire. Karoline, though composed, knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't just an isolated moment, it was about to explode. Far beyond this plane, the man who had started recording was still at it. Subtly adjusting his phone's angle, another passenger, a woman a few rows behind, was already typing furiously on her laptop. There was no stopping this. Now the flight attendant who had confronted Karoline tried to act as if nothing had happened, but the damage was written all over her face. She moved stiffly, avoiding eye contact, her once authoritative presence reduced to cautious, measured steps. It was clear she was waiting to see just how far this would go, and then it happened. A chime rang through the cabin, signaling the airline's in-flight Wi-Fi connection had just gone live. A beat later, a notification buzzed on Karoline's phone, then another, and another. Somewhere, somehow, the story had already hit the internet. She tapped her screen. The first video clip, less than a minute long, was already circulating on a conservative news page. The caption was blunt, cutting straight to the heart of the issue: Christian woman harassed mid-flight over her faith. You won't believe what happened next. And the comments, they were flooding in. This is what we're up against, folks. They won't even let us exist in peace. Unreal. I hope this flight attendant gets what's coming to her. Karoline, you're a warrior. Stand strong. The momentum was unstoppable. She glanced toward the attendant, who was now speaking in hushed tones with the supervisor, her body language stiff with unease. She knew her actions had just ignited something she couldn't contain. By the time the plane landed, this wouldn't just be a viral moment, it would be a movement. As the minutes ticked by, Karoline could feel the weight of the moment settling in. This wasn't just about her, it was about everyone who had ever been silenced, mocked, or singled out for their beliefs. And now the world was watching. The flight attendant, now visibly shaken, avoided her gaze entirely. The airline supervisor, standing just a few feet away, was typing something rapidly on a company-issued tablet, likely an internal report. Damage control, before the headlines got ahead of them. Too late. By the time the plane touched down, her phone was buzzing nonstop. More news outlets had picked up the story, more people were demanding answers, and more voices were rising in support. As she stepped off the plane, a man in the terminal, a stranger, caught her eye. He gave her a small nod of respect. And then another passenger from her flight whispered, "We're with you." She smiled. This wasn't just about what had happened in the air. This was about standing up everywhere. And to those who tried to silence her, they had just made her voice louder than ever. What do you think? Should faith be treated with respect no matter where you are? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that the mainstream media doesn't want you to see.